Okay, so you want to own a recycling plant, charge somebody to deliver material people have already thrown away, separate the useful pieces, compress them into bales, and sell those bales to somebody else. Money when the load arrives. Money when the product leaves. It sounds like the rare business where the customer delivers your raw material and pays you for the privilege. Then the first truck tips its load onto the floor. Cardboard slides out with aluminum cans, plastic bottles, broken glass, wet paper, food, grocery bags, old clothes, a garden hose, and a loose battery hidden somewhere underneath it all. One part of that pile can be sold. Another part has to be buried. One part can wrap itself around the machinery, and the smallest object in the load may be the one capable of shutting down the entire building. That is what makes this business so strange. You need a constant river of material, because the plant is expensive whether the line is full or empty. But the load that keeps the conveyor moving can also be the load that costs you money. The reason is hidden somewhere between the scale at the entrance and the bale leaving through the other door. That is where the money is made, where it disappears, and where a recycling plant that looks busy from the road can quietly become a very expensive problem. To see it, follow that first truck. It crosses a scale, the driver checks in, and the load enters what the industry calls a materials recovery facility, usually shortened to MRF. This is not normally the factory that turns an old bottle into a new bottle or an old box into a new box. It is the sorting stage in the middle. Mixed recyclables arrive together. The plant separates them into recognizable grades, removes as much unwanted material as it can, and produces dense bales that paper mills, smelters, plastics processors, and other manufacturers may be willing to buy. That sounds like a small distinction. It is the entire business. A paper mill does not want a truck full of recycling. It wants a particular kind of paper with contamination below its limit. A plastics processor does not want a colorful pile of containers. It wants a specific resin, prepared consistently enough to run through its own equipment. Your plant does not create the final product. It tries to make a disorderly public waste stream acceptable to the next factory. And what you own depends on how the operation is structured. You may own the industrial land, the building, the tipping floor, the conveyors, the screens, the magnets, the optical sorters, the balers, the scales, and the permits. You may own loaders that push material onto the line, forklifts that move finished bales, and control systems watching objects pass at industrial speed. You may not own the trucks bringing the material. You may not own the landfill receiving what cannot be recovered. You may not own the mills buying the finished bales. Even the material itself can be governed by contracts that decide when responsibility changes hands, who receives the sale proceeds, and who pays when the load is dirtier than promised. From the outside, the facility looks self-contained. Inside the economics, it is connected to decisions made miles away in kitchens, city offices, loading docks, factories, and commodity markets. Before any of those connections produce money, you have to survive building the plant. There is no useful single price for a recycling facility. An old regional line handling a limited stream is not the same asset as a modern automated plant serving a large metropolitan area. The site matters. The permits matter. The age of the equipment matters. The amount of contracted material matters. The distance to buyers matters. Recent facility evidence shows development and modernization projects ranging from several $1 million into the tens of millions. Complete overhauls can move higher. At the largest end, Rumpke built a new recycling center in Columbus, Ohio. That company descriptions placed at roughly $95 million during development and roughly $106 million after completion. The building covers roughly 230,000 square feet and can process up to about 250,000 tons a year. It contains numerous optical sorters, artificial intelligence-assisted systems, balers, quality control stations, and enough interconnected equipment to move roughly 60 tons through the line in an hour. That number is impressive. It also raises a question. Why would anyone spend around $100 million building a machine to sort material that households give away? Start with what the building has to do. The tipping floor must survive loaded trucks dumping material day after day. The electrical system has to power conveyors, screens, sensors, compressors, and balers. Rotating equipment has to separate flat paper from containers. Magnets pull out steel. Other equipment separates aluminum. Optical sorters identify selected materials moving too quickly for a person to inspect one by one, then blasts them into a different path with compressed air. After that, workers still watch the stream for things the machines miss. Mechanics keep the line moving. Loaders feed it. Forklifts remove the finished bales. Fire systems stand ready over a building filled with paper, plastic, motors, batteries, and stored inventory. A plant can spend heavily on capacity before it has enough material to use that capacity. Limited data cited by the Environmental Protection Agency suggest recovery facilities may operate at an average of roughly 56% of their design throughput, although the available sample is limited, and that number does not describe every plant. The important part is not the exact percentage, it is what an empty conveyor means. The loan still exists, the building still needs insurance, supervisors, mechanics, and operators still have to be there. A plant designed for a large stream cannot force nearby cities to create one. Capacity is something you buy. Volume is something somebody else has to promise. Now the truck reaches the scale, and the first revenue stream appears. A city, private hauler, institution, or commercial customer may pay the plant a processing fee for every ton delivered. The plant is not being handed valuable material for free. It is being paid to perform a difficult service, receive an inconsistent mixture, remove what should not be there, separate what remains, and prepare the useful fractions for sale. Historical survey data collected after a major industry disruption found community processing fees averaging around $64 per ton among respondents, with wide variation. That is not a current national rate. It shows why the fee exists. Sorting is expensive enough that commodity sales cannot always be trusted to cover it. Then the second revenue stream appears. The plant sells the recovered paper, cardboard, metals, plastics, and other marketable grades. So yes, money can arrive at both ends. But it does not necessarily stay with the same person. One contract may let the operator keep the commodity revenue. Another may send a share back to the city. Another may require the city to cover part of the shortfall when commodity values fall below the cost of processing. Agreements can include minimum tonnage, contamination charges, inflation adjustments, fuel adjustments, residue fees, and rules deciding who benefits when prices rise. The scale ticket tells you how much material arrived. The contract tells you whether that arrival was good news. And now the truck opens. The load falls onto the tipping floor as one mixed pile, but financially it is already several different things. Aluminum can carry far more value per ton than mixed paper. Clean cardboard may have a ready local buyer. A selected plastic may be useful if the plant can separate it accurately and a processor is close enough. Mixed glass may be recyclable and still be expensive to handle because it is heavy, abrasive, easily broken, and not equally valuable in every market. Some reported material grades have even carried negative prices. That means the plant pays somebody to take them. Why not accept only the valuable materials? Because a curbside recovery facility usually receives a community program, not a custom order. The valuable can arrive with the modest value box, the difficult piece of glass, and whatever else the customer was told to place in the cart. You cannot ask the truck to unload only the profitable objects. The sorting line exists because the bundle arrives mixed, so the owner is not looking at one commodity. The owner is looking at a basket whose contents change with every route, every neighborhood, every season, and every mistake made before the lid of the recycling cart closed. That last part matters more than most people realize. A widely cited study published in 2020 estimated that roughly 17% of the material entering American curbside recycling programs was contamination by weight. That does not mean every plant receives exactly 17%, and incoming contamination is not identical to the final residue leaving the facility. But use it to picture the problem. If 100,000 tons arrive, carrying contamination at that level, roughly 17,000 tons enter the building as material the system did not want. It still crosses the scale. It still occupies the floor. It still moves toward the equipment. Workers still deal with it. Then much of it has to be loaded again, transported again, and disposed of somewhere else. That is the first moment when more volume can become less attractive. The most damaging items are not always dramatic. Plastic bags and film wrap around rotating shafts. Hoses, cords, ropes, and strings of lights become what operators call tanglers. They wind themselves around moving parts until the line has to stop. Picture the shift when that happens. The conveyor goes quiet. Material already inside the building stops moving. Workers secure the equipment. Someone has to cut the tangled material away, inspect the affected parts, and clear the line before production resumes. Outside, trucks do not disappear because a shaft is wrapped in plastic. They continue arriving. The pile on the floor grows while the expensive part of the facility stands still. A bag that took 1 second to place in a cart can consume far more time after it reaches the plant. Food and liquid create a different problem. They soak paper and cardboard, lowering the quality of material that might otherwise have been sold. Broken glass can move through the system like grit, wearing equipment, and finding its way into other grades. Ordinary refuse has no hidden commodity value waiting to be discovered. It becomes a disposal expense after the plant has already spent money touching it. The public sees one blue bin, the owner sees a collection of consequences. Could you simply charge the customer for all of this? Sometimes contracts include contamination charges, and communities can change accepted material rules or improve education. But contamination is not perfectly measured at every cart. Loads are mixed together. The plant still encounters the unwanted material before anyone finishes arguing about who should pay for it. And even if the line removes every obvious bag, hose, and bag of trash, the useful material has not earned its value yet. At the far end of the plant, cardboard becomes one bale, selected paper another, aluminum another, steel another, and chosen plastics their own separate grades. The baler compresses loose material into dense blocks because loose bottles and boxes are expensive to store and transport. Now the next customer enters the story. A mill or processor can inspect the bale for the wrong material, excessive moisture, food residue, color, density, or anything else outside its specification. The buyer can accept it, downgrade it, charge the seller for a problem, or reject it. Picture the shipment reaching the next factory. The bales are unloaded, one is opened or sampled, and material that looked uniform from the outside reveals the wrong objects mixed through it. The truck already traveled, the plant already paid to sort and bale the load. None of that forces the buyer to accept the original price. A rejected or downgraded bale is not just a disappointing sale, it is evidence that the plant spent money making the wrong product. The line can run correctly and still produce something the market does not want at that price. This is why an item can be technically recyclable and economically useless to a particular facility. The machine may not be designed to recognize it. The object may be too small and fall into the wrong stream. It may be the right material in the wrong shape, or the nearest buyer may be so far away that freight consumes the sale value. A bale is not valuable because it looks neat. It is valuable when a real customer can use it, and that customer does not promise to pay the same price forever. In one Northeast regional reporting series, blended commodity value without residuals was a little over $102 per ton in the first quarter of 2025. By the fourth quarter, the comparable measure was a little over $68 per ton. That is a decline of roughly one-third within the year. It is regional evidence, not a universal price for every facility, but the direction shows how quickly the output side can change. At a plant handling 100,000 tons a year, every $10 movement in retained net commodity value represents $1 million before any revenue sharing. The building does not need to catch fire for $1 million to disappear. The market only has to move $10 per ton. For years, American recycling operators had another source of comfort. Large amounts of recovered paper and plastic could be sold overseas. Between 2010 and 2017, China received an average of around 60% of American waste paper exports. That demand gave the system an outlet, including for material that domestic buyers might not have accepted at the same quality. Then, in 2018, the buyer changed the rules. China's national sword policy restricted imports of several waste materials and imposed much tighter contamination standards. Other countries introduced restrictions of their own. Material that had been leaving through ports suddenly had fewer places to go. Bales accumulated. Prices weakened. Communities that had once expected money back from their recycling programs began facing processing charges instead. Nothing visible about the recycling cart had changed. People still filled it, trucks still collected it, plants still separated it, bales still came off the line. What changed was whether someone wanted the result. That is the event that explains the modern plant. After National Sword, operators invested in better screens, more optical sorters, robotics, artificial intelligence, and quality control. The goal was not simply to make the facility look more advanced. It was to recover more usable material and produce cleaner, more consistent bales for buyers who had become less willing to accept mistakes. Now return to the roughly $100 million Rumpke facility in Columbus. The machines matter. The scale matters. The ability to process up to roughly 250,000 tons each year matters. But the plant was not dropped into an empty market and told to find its own purpose. Rumpke already operated a large regional collection network. It had a broad territory capable of feeding material into the facility, experience operating waste infrastructure, and relationships with manufacturers that could use the output. Company Material says much of the recovered material goes to manufacturers in the region. This is why copying the building would not necessarily copy the business. Put the same sorting line in a region without enough committed volume, and it runs below capacity. Feed it a dirtier stream and it loses time, recovery, and bale quality. Place it far from mills and processors, and transportation consumes more of the commodity value. Sign an agreement that leaves the operator carrying most of the downside, and a high-tech facility can process an impressive amount of material without producing an impressive return. Here is the reveal hiding inside the machinery. A recycling plant is not valuable because it owns waste. Waste is abundant. It is valuable when it controls a reliable path through disorder. On the incoming side, that path needs contracted tons, processing fees that reflect the work, clear contamination rules, and some protection when costs change. Inside the building, it needs equipment capable of turning the local material mix into consistent grades. On the outgoing side, it needs dependable buyers, preferably more than one, close enough to make transportation economical. The machinery is the center of that path. It is not the whole path. This is why tons processed can be one of the most misleading signs of success. A scale can tell you that the plant handled a great deal of material. It cannot tell you how much was contamination, how often the line stopped, what the commodity mix was, whether the bales met specification, how far they traveled, how the revenue was shared, or how much debt was attached to the facility. Activity is visible. The economics are hidden inside the ton. Recovery rate can be misleading for the same reason. One operator may use the phrase to describe how much of the target recyclable material the line captures. Another may be describing how much of everything entering the building avoids disposal. A machine-level figure can sound impressive without telling you how much contamination arrived, what the recovered grades sold for, or whether the facility earned an acceptable return. The denominator matters. A plant can recover a high share of a low-value stream. It can create cleaner bales while paying too much debt. It can improve diversion and still lose money on transportation. Technical performance is important. It is not the same thing as ownership success. This also explains why the largest waste companies often try to own more of the chain. Collection routes provide tonnage. Transfer stations direct where the material goes. A landfill provides an outlet for residue. Downstream processing can create another market for selected grades. Vertical integration does not guarantee profit, but it reduces the number of critical relationships controlled entirely by outsiders. Does that mean an independent plant cannot work? No. It means the independent owner has to create protection with agreements instead of corporate ownership. A long-term supply contract can substitute for owning the trucks. Several committed buyers can substitute for owning the next factory. A dependable disposal agreement can substitute for owning the landfill. The advantage is not simply being large. The advantage is knowing which part of the chain can break your plant and making sure that part is not held together by a handshake and an optimistic commodity forecast. And just when the owner thinks every major risk can be reduced to a fee, a specification, or a contract, one small object can ignore all three. A loose lithium-ion battery enters with the next load. It may be buried inside a device or mixed among ordinary containers. In a collection truck or sorting plant, the battery can be crushed, punctured, or otherwise damaged. If it ignites, it is now inside a building containing paper, plastic, belts, motors, wiring, and stored bales. The Environmental Protection Agency reviewed publicly reported incidents and identified more than 240 fires at 64 waste management facilities between 2013 and 2020. The review was not a complete national count. It was enough to show that this was not an imaginary edge case. The scale difference is difficult to ignore. The battery fits in one hand. The facility can cover hundreds of thousands of square feet, yet the smaller object can stop the larger one. A serious fire can damage sorting equipment, destroy inventory, injure workers, interrupt customer service, and force incoming trucks to another facility or disposal site. The owner can face repairs, insurance pressure, contract problems, and debt payments while the conveyor is silent. The plant did not choose to buy that battery. It arrived inside the product the plant was paid to receive. So does owning a recycling plant work? Take the same basic facility and give it two different futures. In the strong version, the line is sized to the material available in the region. Long-term agreements keep trucks arriving at a dependable level. The processing fee reflects the actual work. The contract defines what happens when contamination rises and shares commodity risk in a way both sides can survive. The equipment is modern enough to produce grades that buyers consistently accept, but the owner did not borrow for capacity the market cannot fill. The plant has more than one outlet for its major materials. Mills and processors are close enough that freight remains manageable. Residue has a dependable destination. Maintenance is treated as part of production, not an expense to postpone until the line fails. Fire prevention, detection, insurance, and working capital are strong enough that one bad quarter does not become the end of the business. In that version, the plant can become durable local infrastructure. The city needs the processing capacity. Manufacturers need recovered material. The owner is paid for connecting the two. Now give the same building the weak version. The facility was designed around tonnage that never arrived. Its debt reflects a full line, but its revenue reflects an underused one. To fill the gap, the owner accepts dirtier spot market loads under weak terms. Those tons keep the conveyor moving, but they also produce more residue, more downtime, and lower quality bales. One buyer takes most of the paper. Another important grade travels a long distance. The processing agreement was negotiated when commodity prices were stronger, so the fee does not cover the current burden. The customer keeps a meaningful share of the good market, while the plant carries too much of the bad one. Then prices fall. A shipment is downgraded, a major component fails, or a fire interrupts the line. Incoming material still has to go somewhere, contracts still have to be answered, and the debt does not care that the bale market weakened. From the road, the plant can still look successful. Trucks queue at the scale. Loaders move across the floor. Bales stand in rows. That is not the same thing as money. Go back to the first truck. When it entered the gate, it looked like a load of free raw material attached to a processing fee. By the time it leaves the system, the load has divided into saleable grades: contamination, disposal cost, equipment wear, freight, contract obligations, commodity exposure, and physical risk. The plant can make money from that load, but only after the owner survives everything hiding inside it and finds someone willing to buy what remains. That is what you would really own, not a machine that turns trash into cash. A narrow industrial promise that the mess arriving from one side can be made clean, consistent, and valuable enough for the other side before the cost of doing it consumes the difference.